Hi, everybody. My name is Eugene Turk. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at Align, and I want to welcome you all to our monthly coach webinar for May 2021. We are thrilled this morning to have both Rick Maguire and Joe Ottinger of OKR Advisors presenting on a practical primer on OKRs and the basics of objectives and key results. For those of you who may not be familiar with these two gentlemen and their organization, OKR Advisors, Rick has had a successful 25+ year career as an executive leader at Microsoft, Hewlett-Packard, and Varian Associates prior to joining iInnovate and OKR Advisors. During his years, Rick has led teams to incubate and launch new businesses, new products, new information services, and manufacturing systems. He is a certified scaling up coach and has advised Fortune 500 companies on business strategies and architectural approaches to leverage digital technology for competitive advantage. He also formerly served as a naval officer with decorated service on a missile submarine. Interesting background. Joe is a technology entrepreneur, angel investor, author, and thought leader in the areas of entrepreneurship and innovation. He is the founder of the iInnovate Leadership Network. That is a peer CEO network for tech entrepreneurs that are scaling their businesses. In addition, he has published 2 books. The first is iInnovate, a guide for engaging in the innovation economy. And the second is Beyond Success, building a personal, financial, and philanthropic legacy. He's also authored numerous papers and articles that have appeared in publications like Forbes, Chief Executive Magazine, the Financial Times, and others. And prior to founding iInnovate, Joe had a nearly 20-year technology career, followed by a management consulting career as co-founder of Cotter International. We are certainly honored to have them both join us today to teach us the basics of OKRs. As always, just one administrative matter. We want this to be as educational and informational for all of you as possible. Please feel free to pose your questions using the chat feature, and we will direct them to Rick and Joe at the conclusion of the presentation, although they will also be monitoring the chat as well during the presentation and may answer questions depending on how timely they are with the topic that they're covering at that time. Again, thank you all for attending this Align Coach webinar, and I will now turn the microphone over to Rick and to Joe. Thanks so much, everybody.
Yep, thanks, Eugene. It's good to be with you all today. I'm going to put our presentation up on the screen to guide us in the conversation. So hopefully you're seeing that. And there was a note in the chat about will slides be available? The answer to that is yes. All of this is available to you. So practical primer on objectives and key results, right? Eugene gave you a little bit of background on each of us, our sort of story, where we come from. What it would be good to know is a bit about how we came to use OKRs in our coaching and consulting work. We were working with companies who were successfully using OKRs, right? OKRs, we'll talk a little bit about the history and where they came from. They didn't come out of nowhere, and we found them to be quite powerful. So today, what we're going to do is focus on objectives and key results. And the question to be thinking about wherever you are is, if you had a technique, right, an approach that would allow you to create inspiration and alignment throughout your organization, throughout your company, to the actions that would create the future that you want to create with your company, right? What would that mean to be able to do that, to realize the aspirations you have for your organization, right? So OKRs is that technique. We'll talk more about why it's getting this buzz now, right? And in the course of working with OKRs in organizations that are sort of closer to home for where that approach has grown out of, and ones maybe like yourselves who see the potential of it and want to learn more about it, in our work with companies and leaders in adopting OKRs, we consistently get a set of questions, right? And that's, we're walking you through that is going to be our agenda for today, right? So these are the things that we consistently hear, right? What are OKRs and what aren't they, which is equally important? Where did they come from? You've seen a lot of, if you've been paying attention, you've seen a lot of energy and a lot of buzz around them, right? Why is there all this buzz? Then we're going to take you on a quick tour through a cycle of using OKRs, right? And this is exactly what we would work with an organization who was adopting OKRs walk through, right? Writing them, setting them, which is organizationally getting alignment around them. How do you build them into a rhythm? You know, as Eugene and Henry and your experience with Align, you're here in the Align webinar, right? You're using, ideally, you're using a software, a tool that helps you gain that rhythm. How do you do check-ins around OKRs, right? How do you handle things that are not exactly as you set them out? And then how do you step back and look and have a retrospective and reset them? We're going to talk a little bit about how to use them well if you choose to use them well. You heard a bit about Joe's background in change and leading change. Right? Often OKRs, bringing them into an organization is a change. Right? There are some key things to get the benefit from them well. And that includes what not to do, right? We've seen a lot of the anti-patterns where people have taken on OKRs and did some things that later they said, this doesn't work, right? And then there's some useful resources and tools, and we'll make some time for Q&A. So let's get going. That's going to be a lot for today. So definitions and context, right? What are OKRs and what aren't they? And then Joe's going to talk through a little bit of the history and why all the energy around them today. But what I wanted to start you out with is when I left Microsoft, and Eugene shared a bit about my background in the U.S. Navy, gave me part of my education. Right? And so I was trained as a young person early on in the context of leadership, in that case, in a military construct. And so when I talk to leaders and teams about leadership, everybody has a definition of leadership. So it's a really good place to begin. So what is leadership? Leadership is coordinating action to create a future that you care about that doesn't exist, right? If you're here and you're listening to what we're sharing today, and you're working in the business world and your affiliation with Align, you have something in a business, an organization, a company for yourselves that you aspire to create in the future. And so pragmatically, leadership is about how do you coordinate action amongst all the people who need to participate in bringing that future into reality. Big future you want to create, you're going to have to coordinate action on an increasingly large scale, right? That's right, fundamentally what OKRs are working on, right? It's an approach to help you coordinate action more effectively to bring about a result that you care deeply about. So I'll start you, before we get into definitions, with a little story. And the story here is about bricks and bricklayers. It's called the parable of the bricklayers, if you look it up. So there are three bricklayers. Right? And the person there who's to the left of the bricklayers, I think is supposed to be an architect or a project manager, someone who's coming and sort of inquiring about how the work is going. Right? So the bricklayer on the left, he's laying bricks. He knows what's expected of him. Right? I'm here to lay bricks. Right? The one in the middle, he asked him, hey, what are you doing? Right? Oh, I'm building a wall. So he knows the mission, the project, the piece of the larger puzzle that he's working on. The third bricklayer, well, what are you doing? Well, I'm laying bricks and I'm building a wall, but we're building, in this case, a cathedral. You pick the aspirational large future. If you're familiar with the scaling up methodology, that picks up on Jim Collins' BHAG term, big, hairy, audacious goal, right? So he knows, right? So this is what OKR is simply, right, conceptually is doing, right? It's connecting action to outcomes and results, right? To the larger aspiration that you're creating for whatever your enterprise is. So with that in mind, right, you can ask yourself, right, if you completed all your activities, right, everything happened, right, and milestones in the last quarter, if you think quarter in a business context, did you succeed, right? Ask yourself, did you succeed, right? Well, what if nothing changed? What if nothing materially changed in the performance and the outcomes, of your business, right? So the big idea here is output, things we do, right, doesn't equal outcome, results, or value we create, right? And that's what gets you to, right, objectives and key results, right? Simply put, objectives and key results defined, right, is a collaborative goal-setting protocol for companies, teams, and individuals. Protocol is a fancy word for structured language, structured way of expressing something. So it's about goal setting, and it's about doing it collaboratively. It's a management methodology, a small methodology, which is nothing more than prescriptive steps, right, or a prescriptive approach for how you align the activities of employees or contributors at all levels in an organization to focus on the same priority goals. Right? So the idea, everyone's working on the same priority goals, those critical few that are going to make the difference in the organization's success. It's a common language and critical thinking framework. It allows you to think together as a team, collectively, as a leadership team, in a functional team, in individual teams, and to think critically about, right, the results that we want to create, right, in order to realize the aspirations we have. And it's outcomes focused versus activity focused. This is a big deal. In working with teams, we and people in general, if I tell you, hey, there's this goal we have, you're naturally going to start to think about what are all the things that I have to do, or I would want to do, actions that I would want to take in order to achieve the goal, right? OKRs says, no, first think about the results, that if you had the results, would have you achieve the goal. So that's OKRs defined. If you look at objectives, now we're going to break it down. We're going to look at objectives and key results, right? So objectives in the OKR structure language, they're what's, outcomes that reflect current business priorities, goals, and intents. And we'll give you some examples here later on as we walk through the cycle. What makes a great objective, right? Eugene told you, right, I'm an ex-military person, right? So it's, you want it clear, right, distinct, and aspirational in the sense that it's telling you what to get after, right? So if you have objectives for a company or an organization, you want a few, right? Just a few, right? Because it's about prioritization and focus. You want them to be aligned with an organization's strategy. You want them to be future oriented, defining what will be different when they're implemented, right? Ideally, they're inspirational, right? They're empowering, promoting engagement. They have a clear owner and a team of people who are going to be supporting it. People know where they're connected into it. And ideally, and you'll get different perspectives if you read about OKRs on this, you want it to be qualitative and non-numeric. The key results is where you're going to get down to, right, specifics. And it's time bound. Right? We'll walk you through a typical cycle of OKRs. It's usually annual and quarterly, right? So they're a year or a quarter. So key results, right? Hows, right? How do I know if I've achieved the objective? Right? Ideally, you want a couple of key result statements for each objective, right? They describe the outcomes, right? Not the activities. They're not activity-based. They're clearly measurable, right? You want to capture the action, the projects and the tasks that are required to support key results, but you want to keep those separate. And they're necessary and sufficient. So you want to be able to say, if we achieved all those results, right, we would have achieved the objective. We'll know we would have achieved the objective. We'll know we're on track to achieve the objective. So that's objectives and key results defined. As I said, we're going to get into some examples as we walk you through the cycle, right? So where did they come from? And Joe's going to take us through this. Joe.
Yeah, so OKRs.
Build this out, Joe, so we don't spend a lot of time building slides. Yeah.
Yeah, so OKRs built on other methodologies, and it started with management by objectives with Peter Drucker back in the 60s, and it seems like Peter Drucker is kind of foundational to a lot of what's current today, but it's been updated. And then kind of the next big evolution was, how do you define a SMART goal? And, SMART means specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And then on this kind of measurement and process of taking a company forward through strategic execution, the balanced scorecard with Kaplan and Norton introduced, and it focused on measures that were related to strategic execution, financial, customer, internal processes, learning and growth, primarily, and then OKRs that John Doerr introduced. And because it's built on these other foundational elements, it's really quite a proven methodology. And if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about how it was put into practice. It's also a build slide, so you can build it out. So the methodology started with Andy Grove at Intel, and Intel needed a system, outcomes-based, to coordinate action as they grew. Andy Grove was a founder of Intel, and then it grew into a huge company, and OKRs weren't called that back then, but Andy Grove, who was not only the CEO, taught in the university and taught this methodology. One person that was at Intel that learned about this and then became an evangelist was John Doerr. And John Doerr is one of the top venture capitalists. He's been at the firm Kleiner Perkins for his career. After Intel, he was an early investor, pre-public, and was on the board of Google. And he brought OKRs to Google. So Google, like Intel, but more formalized, brought OKRs from a small company to a behemoth global company. And then John Doerr brought OKRs to all of the companies that he invested in Silicon Valley. And in 2018, wrote the book, Measure What Matters. And many of you may have read the book. And I was very involved with John Kotter and John Kotter's work on leading change. And what happens when you write a book and you put it out into the ecosphere is that everybody interprets it in a different way. And one of the things that we've been able to do is, and we did it at Kotter as well, is see what works in practice and evolve the methodology to ensure that the way it's done is effective. And then OKRs just started to see explosive growth, and first in the tech community, and now it's expanded beyond the tech community into the general community, and it's become, as Rick said, quite a hype. Next slide. One of the great things about OKRs and other methodologies that you may be familiar with is you're looking at planning in different time frames and shorter and shorter time frames. And if you believe that agility is a strategic advantage, the shorter the time frame that you're planning and executing towards, the more agile you can be as you're on the road to reach your BHAG. So there's a strategic cycle, annual planning cycle, alignment cycle that happens quarterly and monthly, and then sprint, and it's this kind of plan, align, execute, and learn all along the way. Next. And it's, as I mentioned with Intel and Google and now many others, it's intended to help you scale. And it does that by promising a number of things. One is focus on priorities, the most important things the company needs to do, and making sure that it's focused on the critical few versus the vital many. And it's one of the things that when we work with clients, it's often hard to get down to those 2, 3, 4 real big priorities that are important. Align and connect for teamwork. Finding ways to work cross-functionally effectively isn't easy. The first is being effective functionally. And OKRs, just the way it works, the process of building accountability into it and tracking accountability, it leads to teamwork, good cross-functional work within a company. And OKRs are transparent. People can see what other people's OKRs are and support them. And so there's a tracking, a transparency, and an accountability. And stretch is a part of it. The design is to go for stretch goals, to separate OKRs and goal setting from performance reviews as much as possible, so that people aren't sandbagging, they aren't setting goals that are easy to achieve, but really are stretching and supporting the organization in its stretch to do something amazing. Rick, next. So climbing the mountain, it's really, it's what it's all about. It's a systematic approach to make the climb. And in some ways, the planning of the climb starts backwards by knowing where you want to be and what's your big, hairy, audacious goal. And then looking at your 3 to 5 year strategic thrusts that are going to help you reach that, breaking that down into a 1 year, the first part of the climb that gets more specific, and then quarterly, making sure you have everything in place to make the climb. I love this picture. If you keep this in mind as we go through it, it will be really helpful. Next.
Yeah, and just to add there, Joe, for those of you who may have some deep familiarity with, scaling up, and certainly there's a history there and an alignment with Align, not to use the word twice. That concept of multi-year, planning and thinking about priorities at multiple levels in the scaling up framework or methodology, they're talked about in terms of thrusts, initiatives, and rocks, but they are priorities for the different time horizons and what you're focusing on to make that climb. So it's important to just, as Joe said, keep that conceptual picture in mind.
When we talk about strategy, strategic thrusts, and OKRs, strategy, we're really talking about the game plan to win. That's looking at where you want to go and where you want to be from 3 to 5 years. Strategic thrusts are your strategic priorities and areas of focus over that time period. And OKRs translate those strategic thrusts into annual and quarterly objectives and measurable key results. And the objective is to align and pace the organization to deliver results and improve the strategic positioning and increase organizational capability. And we look at those 3 things as being absolutely essential to scale. OKRs aren't the whole system, and it's important. And Align as a system is looking at it more holistically, but OKRs are an important part of the system. And in order for OKRs to be effective as a strategic execution tool, your strategy needs to be sound and your strategic thrusts need to be clear. And so you're constantly looking upstream to make sure that's happening. And then once your objectives and your outcomes and your results are clear, then it's all about how you get there. And so downstream, once you know where you want to go and how you're going to measure success. It's all of the work that you're very comfortable, organizations are very comfortable with, just project management and the people side and budgets and customer processes and operations in general. Next. Here's the second picture that I think is helpful when you're thinking about the entirety of an organization. So if you think about a trip and you're going to go on a trip, you want to get to Yellowstone, and you're on the East Coast, you have a map and or a guide, and that's your kind of strategy of you know where you want to go. You kind of know the route you want to take, and now you're on the route. And there's two things that become very important. One is you want to make sure the car is sound, that you've got gas, that it's not overheating, that everything in the car and in kind of the basic business is sound. And often that's measured with KPIs as, okay, how is everything going? And then on the route, you might see that there is a roadblock and you need to figure out the best way around it. And your navigation system helps you determine, all right, I still want to go to the same end, Yellowstone, but I can't go the route I originally planned because things changed, and now I need to reroute. And really, OKRs are to help you in rerouting so you can get most effectively to your destination.
Nice. Yeah, so just to conclude here, it's about strategic execution, right? Strategy, execution. It's not strategy, and it's not all of the execution. And you need to be thinking about that very clearly, and that's what the broader perspective helps you do. The value that people are seeing in it, right, is basically the world's changing. We have to be adaptive. We have to be able to create more dynamic ability to respond, with our business. And we have to have a more way of involving the organization in its entirety, right, in a conversation that allows you to get after the right things. And that's has been hugely highlighted, through this coronavirus COVID season. Right? When many people, went to remote work, if they did stay engaged, right? So how do you coordinate action? Back to that big idea, right? Coordinate action strategically. So that's a foundational view of OKRs. Now I'm going to take you through a quick trip through a cycle of OKRs, right? This is how you would actually go about putting them into practice. This is the methodological piece. When we do this work with companies, right, this is where you get in and do some more, in-depth hands-on, and the context matters, the maturity of the people matters, right? How much they've thought through their strategy matters. But OKRs is a practice. One of the things that I was pretty deeply involved in at Microsoft was the transition. If you're familiar with, the software world, agile software development, agile practices, Scrum, right? All those practices and methodologies and tools evolved to be able to create, right, software that was meaningful to its users and valuable in a more iterative, adaptive way, right? In a lot of ways, that same need is moving businesses to be able to be more agile and adaptive in how they create the value they create. So let's go through a cycle. So what does an OKR cycle look like, right? A typical OKR cycle, as Joe has spoken to, starts with having some strategic priorities, operating plan, right? Organizations are going to do some strategic thinking and planning, right, around, okay, like what does that climb look like? Where are we aspiring to? What's our strategic plan? And given our strategic plan, right, what is this year about? So when you get to the point where it's what is this year about, you're talking about company, right, organizational level objectives and key results, right, for the year and for the first quarter, the first leg of the race. So you can think of running a year race a quarter at a time, right? The process there is to set those out in draft form and gather input, right? You brainstorm them, get them out, gathering input. One of the aspects of the methodological element to OKRs is this bottom up, top down, bottom up, right? So you're putting out candidate objectives and key results and getting feedback from those who have to execute on them as to whether or not they're well formed or clear, and right, that you got a good tight alignment around those. Then you're gonna, right, once you have your company objectives and key results set, if you're using OKRs at a functional level, department, function, team, or individual level, then people are setting theirs with respect to that larger context, right? And then you're into the cycle of communicating the company-wide OKRs. If you're using a system, like Align, in Joe's history, right? Lots of people started when there wasn't OKR software using spreadsheets, right? And then you're working through a cycle on a regular basis to track progress, to be attentive to what's happening. And then you're saying, okay, we did that. We ran that leg of the race, right? That quarters race, 13 weeks at a time, right? 3 months at a time. What did we learn, right? Now we got to look back up, look at our strategic priorities, look at our annual objectives and key results, and say, let's do it again, okay? So when you step into that cycle, the first step is setting objectives and key results. There's a couple things to say here. If you recall when I defined OKRs for you, right? Well-written objective statements, direction, intent, big idea, aspirational, help guide choices, right? Well-written key result statements, describe outcome, measure of progress, objectively measurable, right? Describe from to, right? Very clear, align upstream and downstream actions, right? So the reason I come back to this with you is one of the things we find is when organizations start using OKRs, right? Part of the work is to collectively get clear about what you want to accomplish and express it in written form. When I was at Microsoft, people used to talk about writing clarifies thinking, right? So it takes time to write good objectives and key results, right? So be patient if you take on objectives and key results with the writing process. The ones you write first probably aren't the ones you should go with. Here's a couple of examples from a client that I have worked with, right? These are the result of quite a few conversations to get them down, right? To this level, right? So if you look at this one on the left, right? Short, sweet, aspirational. Everybody in the organization knows what we're trying to accomplish, right? Best renewal season ever. That's meaningful in their context, right? How do we know we're successful, right? These are the statements, right? And each one of the statements is 100% objectively accessible. We know whether or not we achieved it or not, right? Other example to the right, relevant to their business. If you're in the software business, ARR is annual recurring revenue, right? But the point is, close the gap. We know what it is. Everybody can say, oh, well, what's the gap, right? How big is the gap? What do we need to do to close it, right? So clear objective, short and sweet, right? Tight statements about what the results are. Doesn't say everything you need to do to go make those things happen. That's the point. That's the work. So when you set them, right, at that top organizational level, then you have to say, okay, the next step, right, this is alignment and connection, is where you're either doing in the OKR language what would be called cascading, or you're doing localizing. So cascading is the language that's around aligning department or team actions with upstream actions, right? That where the completion dependency is explicitly defined. And by that I mean you're literally connecting hierarchically. In order for this result to be achieved, these results need to be achieved, right? Or this objective needs to be achieved. Localizing is basically saying we've set those, and anyone in the organization can look at what the organization has defined as the top priorities, right? The top objectives, and align their work to that, okay? Graphically, it looks something like this. right? These are directly cascaded, right? Objective, annual key result, quarterly key result, department key result, right? Localized is I'm over here in this department, right? And I can say, oh, based on what I do, my work, my objective in my area, my top priority aligns to or is associated with, right, that company objective, right? This is a complicated slide. You're not going to read everything that's on it. The big idea, and you'll have it, is simply that in an organization, right, you have a functional organization. If that's the way you organize, hierarchical functional organization, what objectives and key results do is, in effect, they form a little virtual team around an objective to create the right collaboration and coordination in order to make that happen. So often people will ask, right, what's the role of an objective owner? If I'm the owner on one of these objectives, like, what am I supposed to do? Or if I'm a key result owner, what am I supposed to do, right? And the point is, what you're supposed to do is be responsible for the coordination of action around the achievement of that objective or its key results. All right, so if you've set OKRs, like, now what? What happens? Now, assuming you've set them and you've written them well, and you're going to go off and run that race, right? You really have three possible, right, paths you could follow, right? You could be using OKRs as kind of, oh yeah, we did that OKR thing, right? That's that red line at the bottom, right? What was that we did? What were those things, right? Or you could be the one at the top, right? Right? These things are front and center for us on a regular basis. They're part of our team discipline. They create high transparency. They keep the focus on action, right? Align software systems like Align, right, help you keep things front and center, but they have to be the right things to be front and center. If you're irregular, you're kind of in the middle. Maybe once a month, somebody says, oh, we need to have a review meeting. Can we update those things? What happened on that, right? Right? You want the priorities to be the priorities, and you want the coordination of action to be happening on a regular basis, right? Number one thing that shows up in coaching organizations is basically, how do you, right, not be here? How do you not be at the end of the quarter and say, we didn't do all the things we said we were going to do that quarterly planning session. We didn't make all that happen, right? How you make results a weekly habit. You make results a weekly habit, right? Which means that you need to bake it into your rhythm, right? There's a rhythm, right? Where you're working on a daily cadence. If you're familiar with scaling up, daily huddles, right? You have a weekly cadence, you have a monthly cadence, and your teams are coordinating, and OKRs are front and center as part of the conversation. As Joe said, they're not the entirety of the conversation, but they are part of the conversation about how are we progressing to accomplish the things that are most meaningful to us. Back to that road trip analogy, if you're not looking at the map, seeing where you are, assessing the current situation and deciding, are you on track or not, then you're not doing the work. Bake it into the rhythm. Most important thing you could do. If you're in the meetings around assessing objectives and key results, key point on this is, right, these things are action meetings, they're flow of outcomes meetings, and they're about learning. Big shift for teams, right? This isn't about everybody showing up and statusing each other for the sake of statusing each other. It's about coordinating action, and it's learning. What do we need to learn? Are we on track? Who needs help, right? So that's a coaching point with respect to managers and teams.
And Rick, I would add a third point, which is integrated. It's when you're having meetings, this isn't a separate meeting. It's baked into your regular weekly or monthly or quarterly meetings. It's not intended to be additional work on the side. It's intended to be really integral to what you do.
Yeah, beautiful. And when we coach teams, we ask them, what's your rhythm? Do you have it? How does it happen today? Right? So your tone sets the tempo, right? If you're organizing a change, you wanted this mood of ambition and ownership. It's about growth, as Joe pointed out. It's not compliance. It's this balance between planning and thinking about calibrating results and celebrating accomplishments. And this language of breakdowns or interruptions is basically, If you're trying to do something that's hard and difficult, you're going to end up facing, things that you didn't plan for, right? That's an opportunity to learn, right? Refocus and get back on track. OKRs helps you do that, right? That's the big idea. So I'm going to work you through the cycle, the rest of it pretty quickly here. Monthly reviews in a monthly, if you have an existing cadence around monthly, many organizations have a monthly business review, for example, where you're looking at business performance all up. You're looking at the health of the organization. You may be having some strategic conversations that you need to have, making space for that. You want to be looking at your performance. A month is enough time on the clock to be able to say, are we on track with confidence to achieve those key results? For the ones that are lower, right? What do we need to do to get back? Do we need additional, right, resources? Is this still a priority, right? You may decide that something's happened and a key result that you felt was important at the beginning isn't anymore. And it's okay, back to the agile thing, to say, cancel, not going to do that, right? Oftentimes teams end up with who start down the path of OKRs end up putting too much on their plate because they haven't had the experience of, right, being this explicit before, right? So monthly reviews, key part of the process. Quarterly retrospective and planning, right? So quarterly, right, is when you're done. Now you're done, right? You got to go back and score yourself, see how you did. How well aligned were we, right? How were we consistent in our rhythm of execution, right? How did our team handle if we saw interruptions, right? What's the quality of the work that came out of this? Are there other performance indicators that need to be tracked, right? Lots of learning in a retrospective. Make time for that as a part of your quarterly planning, right? OKR should be front and center in your quarterly strategic planning. Okay? A great exercise to do in a retrospective is do your time pie. There's a little time pie exercise. Ask your team, right? Where did our time go? And how did we do with respect to our OKR achievement? And then you can do sort of classic retrospective. What went well, what didn't go well, right? It's all about the learning, right? Again, back to the beginning, at the end of the day, right? It's all about, right? How are you using the time? Are you focused on the things that are going to make a difference as you move forward, right? So that's a very quick trip through the cycle, right? When we work with teams, in order to become proficient at this, this is where the rubber proverbially meets the road, right? It's how do you make them work in practice? So the next piece we wanted to share with you, and Joe's going to take you through this, is how to use OKRs well, what to think about if you're going to actually, okay, I think I like this. I want to go do this.
Thanks, Rick. And let's build this one at a time, if you don't mind. Having worked with dozens and dozens of companies, virtually in every industry, different sizes, some of the fastest growing companies in the US, we've learned some things, and we can't explain all, but the top 5 success considerations, things that we know need to be in place to be effective and to have it take root in a positive way in an organization. So first, senior, this is part of change of any sort, but senior leadership sponsorship and active use. So if senior leaders aren't on board, and there's a learning curve to OKRs, it may be wait it out. This is the next cool shiny object, and we'll wait till that passes. But if senior leaders are really committed and they actively use it, then there's a much better chance you're going to get the outcomes and the results as a company that you want. Let's go to the next. We talked about champions. When you're taking, you're either cascading or localizing OKRs, and you're using it in teams, it's nice to have somebody who really is an expert. We have programs to certify champions, take them through a 2-day course or a quarterly course so that they really become experts internally to the organization and continue to, as you have new employees, help them proliferate. Next. We highly recommend a crawl, walk, run approach. It's possible to be successful if you just throw it out there and everybody kind of, reads whatever they can read. They get whatever you're learning. You work on it together. But what we found is if there's not an understanding, then if you run too fast, it really creates overhead and issues. And we very often have been in situations where we're restarting OKRs to make sure the grounding is there. Next. Keep it simple. So we just explained a lot to you, and Rick went through the methodology. At the end of the day, it's to support critical thinking that you have as a company. And if you overcomplicate it in terms of the methodology and the language, it can slow you down. So we really suggest that it's about critical thinking. It's about helping you set priority goals. It's about your rhythm of business and what's smart to do as a company. Next. And yeah, I mentioned this before, but integrate them into your rhythm of business. It shouldn't be a separate activity when you're having a monthly review or a quarterly review or a weekly, business team meeting. This is part of it. It's not something that should take extra time and make extra time for.
Yeah. And just to re-emphasize there, back to the senior leadership, what Joe said is if you choose to use OKRs, there'll come a time when as leaders you'll have to put the attention on something, meaning like we said that was our priority, why aren't we making progress on it? When that moment passes and you don't have that conversation, then the signal you've just sent is, yeah, this thing we're doing, like, it isn't really the real work. It's just something we think we kind of ought to do.
And just supporting that comment from Rick, it is about setting up the right conversations, because you are reviewing OKRs. If something's not working, you want to have the conversation. It's a learning experience. So just supporting that. Yeah, it sets up the right conversations. So let's go to the next. Mentioned the learning curve. It takes a while to master OKRs, maybe 2, 3, sometimes 4 quarters, successively getting better and more mastery. But if the expectation is out of the chute, everybody's going to understand it, people are going to be disappointed. If you set the expectation of this learning curve to achieve better and better outcomes, you'll set the company on the right path. Next. So pitfalls, things that we've seen in practice that actually hinder effective use of OKRs. We've talked about rolling out OKRs too quickly and the potential challenges that causes without understanding effectively how to use them. Let's go to the next one. We mentioned earlier, but talk about it again. If it's OKRs are a part of your business operating system, it's not the whole system. So when OKRs, people attempt to cram everything into OKRs to be your entire system, it's not effective, but it really needs to be part of the strategic piece, the execution piece, and the systems within your company.
Yeah, and I would just add there that what you find in that case, where if you do take on OKRs, or you're working with an organization that takes on OKRs, it may actually reveal to you, where there is clarity and alignment, right? So OKRs may actually be the fact that you're struggling to get down to a critical few priorities, right? Isn't a problem with OKRs. It means you probably haven't done the strategic thinking and get the clarity and alignment around strategy with leadership to actually arrive at those priorities. And OKRs is just revealing that to you because you only have 3.
this is just an amplification of attempting, if you, for instance, start with company OKRs and departmental OKRs are not yet in place, or you have other pieces of the system that aren't visible, you try to cram everything into it. And what Rick said initially is that your mind, when you're thinking about goals, is to go to the project and tasks that help you achieve them versus the results first. And so when you see a lot of OKRs that are tasks, you know that something needs to, to be done to make it more results oriented. And you can often ask, to what end? To what end? Why? Why do you want, why do you want to have, a marketing launch? What are you trying to achieve, right? With your marketing goals. Focusing too much on the how versus the why of OKRs. So, why, at the end of the day, OKRs is a system to improve performance, the way you operate and your financial performance. And people can get too tied up in the methodology itself and even talk about OKRs as a thing versus it being part of helping to get better outcomes. And it kind of dovetails into simplicity. Don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. And last, so you remember the lines that Rick showed, the green one being high performing use of OKRs. If you set OKRs and then forget them until the end of the quarter where they're going to be measured, you're not really using them as part of your day-to-day business to get the results you want. And so there was a middle line there that was, all right, we're kind of using it, but it's not baked into the way we do business. And those are the 5 big kind of pitfalls, or another 5 behind that we could add, but these are the big ones.
Nice. Yeah, and so let's wrap up. We have a couple minutes here for Q&A if we want to take it. Joe, I don't know if you have any things to say on this last one. Hopefully you're at that top of the mountain, and you got your next BHAG in mind.
One question: are MBOs and OKRs mutually exclusive? If not, where is the line drawn for usage? You want to take that, or you want me to?
You go ahead, and then if there's something else to say, I'll say.
I would say MBOs are a system similar to OKRs, but management by objectives doesn't focus as much on kind of the outcome focus or the rhythm of business. So I would say if you have a system of MBOs, it'll get you a lot of the way there, but there are pieces that OKRs covers that MBOs don't. Yeah.
And the thing I would add with respect to, goal setting methodologies, MBOs being one, I spent some time at Hewlett Packard, which was a big, initial proponent of, that type of goal setting approach, right? It tends to be individually based, right? You tend to have hey, I've got my MBOs for me, right? Or my team, right? And so with OKRs, you want to think first about what's the coordinated action for the company, right? And then how does that flow to people? And a lot of I think Align, you have one-on-one capability in the tool, right? Again, you're marrying up, right, the conversations you need with individual people around their individual goals, and then how they align to the larger objectives and set of results the company is seeking to achieve.
Another great question: what is the relationship between business as usual versus OKRs versus scaling up?
Yeah, so so if you think about business as usual versus OKRs, and then scaling up, so scaling up, if what you're referring to there is the framework as opposed to what a business does to scale up, right? Scaling up as a methodology or framework is trying to get its arms around how do you coordinate action in the business as a whole, as Joe mentioned before, right? Every business needs to do three things every iteration. It needs to produce a set of results. It needs to do something that's going to advance its strategic position in the marketplace, right? Execute on its strategy. And it needs to build organizational capability to do more of those two in the future. And that's particularly true if you're scaling. In other words, you need to can build the capability ahead of when you're going to need it in rapid scale. Right? What OKRs allows you to do is get focus on the critical few that are going to, right, make the difference in the business, not the vital many. And that's the distinction you want to make between, right, trying to capture everything a business does in OKRs, right, versus, right, what are going to be the critical few that actually shift the business at the end of the quarter. And
let's just go to the one next slide, Rick, and we'll wrap up. So these are things that we'll provide to Eugene, and he's writing a newsletter, and it will come out. But we have a e-learning bundle. It covers the basics of OKRs. It covers writing effective OKRs, the OKR cycle, and implementing OKRs. It's usually about 3 or 4 times the price of $99. So it's something you can go and look at. And if you want to go more in depth, we do provide a certification for coaches. So that's a second thing. And then we just put our contact information and website on it as well.
Joe and Rick, we did have one other question that was posed. We're running short on time, but maybe we can answer this. The question was, when implementing OKRs for the first time in the organization, is it better to do it with the help of a consultant or internally? I guess that really just depends on the business, but I'll let you guys answer that one.
Yeah, well, I would say the question is, right, your experience, with implementing change. I've certainly seen organizations take on, OKRs and new things and be successful with them, right? But what I'd say is, getting a coach or some assistance in, right, giving you feedback and clarity on, right, the application of the methodology, right, having the right conversations, right, being a catalyst, and like any change work, if you're a leader, Joe and I shared our leadership backgrounds, you appreciate the benefit of being able to be a participant in it, right? And not the person necessarily who's also having to facilitate the change, right? So I would say, you can do it on your own. It's helpful to get some help.
And I'd add a third thing, if you can build internal capability where you really have expertise internally, that's another option, and you will very quickly know whether it's being effective or not, and whether you need outside help.
Yeah. Well, and organizationally, depending on the size of your organization, right, in the tech world, if you play in that space, there's been an evolution of a role specifically taken from the military context or political context called staff. It's somebody who sits on the executive leadership team who, is basically their job is to coordinate the work of the executive leadership team, right? And that's a great place, or a business manager to put the locus of helping to facilitate an OKR implementation, because it takes the sort of a lot of the day in, day out load off the leaders.
Rick and Joe, there was just one question that I wanted to pose, and obviously you've given us a great history of OKRs. They came from large organizations like Intel and Google that are predominantly historically in the tech space, but I just want to make sure everyone understands that OKRs are just as powerful and impactful for non-tech companies and small and mid-sized companies that are looking to grow and scale. You don't necessarily have to be a large organization or tech focused in order to implement and see the benefit of OKRs, correct?
Yeah, you bet, right? It's as we talked about, right? The beauty is simply that you're getting the advantage, right? If you're of the learning that's occurred around this, and it's all about coordinating action. Get to clarity, alignment, inspiration to create results that deliver what you want to accomplish as a business, right?
Awesome. Well, we're a little bit over time. I want to obviously thank our presenters for a really wonderful presentation on the basics of OKRs. A huge thank you to Rick and Joe for your time. Obviously, there's their contact information, and you can learn more about them at OKRadvisors.com. If you have any questions about how to use Align to implement OKRs, please don't hesitate to contact your Align advisor, or you can always email us at support@aligntoday.com. Thank you again. We hope that you will join us for our next Coach webinar. That's going to take place on Tuesday, June 8th at 11 a.m. Central, when we will have a presentation by Marshall Martin, a Petra coach, on the importance of consistent communication rhythms through daily and weekly huddles. This was talked about by Joe and Rick. Whether you're doing scaling up, OKRs, or any other methodology, you've really got to bake this in, and you've got to communicate about these strategic objectives and key results or priorities throughout that cycle, whether it be daily, weekly, or monthly. So more detailed information and a webinar registration page will be available soon, and we certainly hope that you will join us. Till then, thank you very much, Rick and Joe, and we hope that everyone has a great day and the rest of the week. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Be encouraged, be well, and go out and realize that possibility. Thanks. Good to be with you.
Thank you.